empezamos otra sesión de 25 minutos usando técnica Pomodoro. Vamos a ver ahora, vamos a ver otro tema. Vamos a ver,
I'll take a closer look at
list. No, ya las listas ya las vimos.
So here we type out square brackets and specify
Functions, con functions.
Tired of breaking your coding flow to configure CI/CD? Meet TeamCity Pipelines, the world's most intelligent CI/CD solution, with self-tuning pipelines that will never break your flow. Easily build your pipelines through a visual editor without spending hours Googling how to figure it all out. Or, if you prefer the keyboard,
I'm sad.
Ya se tendría que ver. Listo. En teoría. Cancel. Code X. Listo, arranquemos. Keywords, arguments.
With functions that take multiple numerical values, and it's not quite clear what those values represent, use keyword arguments to improve the readability of your code. And finally, if you're passing both positional and keyword arguments, use the keyword arguments after the positional arguments.
Return statement. Ok, vámonos con return statement.
So far, you have learned how to create functions and send them information using their parameters. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create functions that return values. This is particularly useful if you're doing some kind of calculation in your function and you want to return the result to whoever is using your function. Let me show you. So let's start by defining a function called square. This function simply calculates the square of a number. So we need to add one So let's start by defining a function called some kind of how to add. So far, you have learned how to create functions and send them information using their parameters. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create functions that return values. This is particularly useful if you're doing some kind of calculation in your function and you want to return the result to who.
This is so functional. If you're doing calculation, and you want to return an item.
Whoever is using your function. Let me show you. So Let's start by defining a function called square. This function simply calculates the square of a number. So we need to add one parameter here, that is our number. Now here we want to calculate number times number, that is the square of a number. Now to return this number outside of this function, we simply use the return statement. So return. Now our square function is very simple. It only has one line of code. But in a real program, you might have a function that has 10 lines of code to calculate something. So this return statement is very valuable. With that, we can return values to the callers of our function. So with this, when we call the square function, let's say we give it 3, now this function returns a value, just like the input function of Python. This input function waits for the user to type something and press enter, and then it will return the user's input as a string. So we can get it and store it in a variable like this, right? We have the same story with our square function. So our square function returns a value. We can simply get it and store it in a variable. Let's call that result. Now we can print result on the terminal. There you go. So result is 9. We could also pass this function call directly inside of the print function without defining a separate variable. Sometimes this is useful for writing shorter code. So in this case, we don't really need this result variable. We simply want to print the square of 3. So we could simply pass this function call right here as an argument for the print function. So let's delete this variable. Now our code is shorter. So with this, for calling the square function, this returns a value, and we'll pass that value as an argument to the print function. Okay? When we run this program, we get the exact same result. There you go. Now, what happens if we don't use a return statement in our function? So in the last example, we simply used a print statement. Let's temporarily remove this return statement and print the result on the terminal, like this. So let's run our program one more time and see what we get. We get two things on the terminal, the number 9 and none. What is happening here? Well, when Python interpreter executes this code, first it will call the square function. So the control moves to the square function. Here we calculate the square of this given number and then print it on the terminal. That is the reason we see 9 right here. Now, by default, all functions return the value none. So if you don't have a return statement here, by default, Python returns none. None is an object that represents the absence of a value. It's like nothing, or null in C, C++, Java, and JavaScript. So in this example, we didn't have a return statement, and by default, Python returned none from this function. So after this square function is executed, the value none is returned and passed as an argument to the print function. That is the reason we see none on the second line. So here are the two things you need to take away from this tutorial. By default, all functions in Python return none. You can change that. So if you have a function that calculates something, you can return the result using the return statement. Here's the code for our emoji converter program that we wrote earlier. If you missed that tutorial, make sure to go back and watch it. As I told you before, there is a table of content right below this video in the description. So you can simply click on the emoji converter tutorial to watch it. Now, you're
to watch it. Okay. So we have to create de convertir emoji. ¿Cómo era el convertir emoji? Ahora entonces tenemos input usuario. Eso igual a anything. Ok, listo. Tenemos su diccionario de emojis. Dictionary emoji es igual a 10. Entonces tenemos que la cara feliz se le asigna el valor de happy. Listo, pero eso tiene que ir entre comillas. Eso va separado por una coma. Y hacemos el carito triste. Eso va, se le asigna con puntos. Bien. Listo. Listo, entonces ahora queremos crear un output customer igual a no se deja vacío y comenzamos a iterar for item in dictionary emojis, no, en input user. Ahora aquí output customer igual más igual item dictionary emoji que lo que vamos a buscar el item. Entonces encontramos la carita feliz, okay. Y ¿cómo? Si no les vamos a asignar el mismo item, más espacio, vamos a asignar unos espacios aquí, listo. Y aquí me va a imprimir output customer, listo. Entonces solo para verificar, hello. Pero aquí no va a verificar nada, tenemos que entrar acá, limpiar la consola y aplicarlo hello Andrés. Sí. Emoji Iron dice que no lo encuentra. Dict option is not callable. .get, me falta .get. Entonces, hello Andrés. Dictionary input user. Entonces yo escribí hello Andrés. Entonces output custom. Me está agregando un espacio en cada uno. dictionary emoji punto get pero no porque no debería. Hello Andrés, no. Vamos a llamar Iron. No. Me falta el split. Entonces aquí words igual a input user punto split cada vez que encuentre un espacio. Y entonces a este words lo que le vamos a entonces ok, listo. Entonces ahora sí, listo, ya lo Andrés, listo, ya lo tenemos. No sé, lo que estaba sucediendo era que estaba corriendo cada uno de los strings de lo que escribe el cliente HTML. Entonces tocaba agregarle el split que separa por elementos, como que lea todo el input del cliente, pero sepárelo cada vez que vea un espacio. Listo. Entonces ahora en Words, entonces como tenemos palabras, ahora están encapsuladas en palabras, por palabras dentro de otro array que sería el Words. Ahora sí, por cada palabra, si se parece dentro del diccionario emoji, agrégalo. Listo.
Exercise is to reorganize this code using a function. So I want you to extract it.
Ok, entonces tenemos que pues nos devolvería solo es un return. Pues, que sería lo que todo esto sería dentro de una función, entonces sería def emoji converter, sería emoji converter y ahí vendría listo. Y aquí vendría siendo y eso igual tenemos que llamarlo después de haberlo creado emoji converter frase cliente customer phrase customer porque acá es un parámetro, no un argumento. Customer phrase. Listo. Emoji converter. Input user. Customer phrase. Aquí, customer phrase. Ya listo. Pues tendría que funcionar de la misma manera. Hi YouTube. Hi YouTube. Happy to see you. Happy to see you. ¿Qué sé yo? and set to say goodbye. And set to say goodbye. To say goodbye. Entonces él toma el customer first. Lo debería ir. Sí, emoji converter. Aquí le estamos llamando. Este coge la frase del cliente que divide cada un bloque de palabras, lo divide por espacios. Identification. Dictionary. Sí. Porque no me está funcionando. Digamos, él puso el ejemplo de que a ver, ocho. Veinticuatro. Bueno, fueron 25 minutos solo creando la función. Esto devuelve números, lo he visto. Pero no sé si devuelva strings. No sé por qué no quiere devolverlo. O sea, si le pongo print, si lo devuelve. Customer.
A function in this code. Because this algorithm for converting these smiley faces into emojis is something that we probably want to use in a lot of different applications. We can use it in a chat application, in an email application, and so on. We don't want to write all this code every time. We want to convert these characters into smiley faces. So out of all these lines of code that we have, from line 1 to line 10, the lines 2 to 9 belong to our algorithm. All these lines together implement this feature. So you should put these lines in a separate function. Now, why don't we have the input in that function? Because the input can come in different forms. Currently, we're using the input function to receive the input from the terminal, but in other applications, we might receive the input from a graphical user interface. So the input can come in different forms. We don't want to put that in our function because this line will...
Bueno, vamos a descansar estos 25 minutos. Pues es la técnica, yo sé que es muy rápido, se pasa un momentico, pero pues hay que dejar descansar el cerebro. Entonces ya nos vemos dentro de otros 5 minutos.